Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell, and this is my full breakdown of the movies that I watched from the Sundance Film Festival this year. For the third year in a row, I watched virtually, meaning that not all of the movies that played Sundance were available for me to watch, but I watched as many as I could. It was 16 this year, which I think was about what I watched last year, and I'm super excited to hopefully, maybe, I'm looking into actually going and covering the festival next year at this time, which means that I could see a lot of movies that weren't available for me to watch at home. But that doesn't mean that there weren't any good movies. I actually think that this was a year where I didn't see any movies that I was like, I regret watching, or that was a waste of my time, which I can't say for the last couple years. There were some movies that I liked better than others, but overall, I'd say that everything was at least interesting. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through the 16 movies that I watched. I'm going to rank them basically starting at the bottom and going all the way to my favorite film that I saw at the festival. So without further ado, let's get to number 16 on my list, which technically would be my least favorite movie, but I still have to give it points for originality and also strong acting performances from its two leads, who happen to be Kristen Stewart and Steven Yeun. The movie was called Love Me. It won the Alfred P. Sloan Prize for use of science in film at Sundance. It's a love story between a buoy in the water on a destroyed Earth who poses as a life form to talk to a satellite that's orbiting the Earth that's been left there to welcome people that might come from other civilizations. Humanity is extinct, and the movie is really about this buoy trying to replicate what life on Earth was like before humanity went extinct by looking at things like Instagram and YouTube and sort of replicating the false reality that humans projected as their online selves. It's a concept that I honestly think would have worked great as a 45 or 50-minute short, but as a 90-minute feature film, it sort of meanders, and it just sort of lost me as it went along. There are some really interesting themes, and like I said, points for ingenuity, points for creativity, points for performance, but overall, I don't think that the movie comes together very well, and like I said, if it was a short, I think that it would have generated a lot of attention, especially if you still have Kristen Stewart and Steven Yeun attached to it, but as a feature film, it didn't quite work for me. At number 15 is a movie called Pony Boy, set in the mid-2000s about an intersex sex worker named Pony Boy who gets mixed up with a two-bit drug dealer named Vinny, who's played by Dylan O'Brien, and goes on the run after a drug deal gone bad. And the crime angle of this I found to be somewhat derivative. It's a lot like other movies, especially festival movies that you've seen, with the sort of gritty, grimy grunge of the city. But inside that been there, done that sort of feel with the crime element, I think that there were a lot of interesting things about being seen, but it was all buried under this very familiar story. And it seems like so many stories like this are often tied to crime and seediness. And I think it's a real shame because Pony Boy had a lot to offer. It reminded me of the movie Mutt from last year. I thought that Mutt was a much better movie, but it approached the idea of being transgender in a way that I hadn't seen in a movie before, and that really, I think, helped me to identify with that character and, by extension, the people behind the film that were expressing their lived experiences and their points of view. And there were glimmers of that in this film as well. The performances were strong, and there were some moments of genuine interest, but it really did feel like they slapped on a familiar coat of paint to a new angle and a new main character that I hadn't seen in a movie before. At number 14 is a movie that a lot of people liked at Sundance. It's called Exhibiting Forgiveness, which features a fantastic lead performance from Andre Holland. It's about an artist named Terrell who's reunited against his will with his homeless, longtime addict father, and the movie goes into generational and childhood trauma and the merits of forgiveness. And this movie to me felt like a very Sundance movie. It's a movie about an artist who uses his real life experience to inspire his own art show called Exhibiting Forgiveness. And it's directed by the artist whose life inspired the art show Exhibiting Forgiveness, which in turn inspired the movie about his own life. It's very self-reflective, and that's not such a bad thing. There's a couple movies down the road that are also self-reflective that I liked a little bit more, and it's not that I didn't like this movie, but it just felt very much like sort of high-class navel-gazing, I guess. Maybe that's a little too dismissive. And again, the performances were very strong, but when they had the little director's introduction setting up the movie, the director of the film was talking about, get ready because this is going to be such a painful movie to watch. And I really feel like if you just let the movie do that and don't try to tell me that that's how this movie's supposed to make me feel, then it's going to feel a lot more natural. And it did feel like it was trying a bit too hard. And really, as I was mentioning earlier, there aren't any movies this year that I thought were absolute misfires, but this was one that just didn't really connect on all cylinders for me because it didn't feel as fresh and vibrant as a lot of the other movies that I saw this year. At number 13 is a movie called Suho, which won the World Cinema Grand Jury Prize, basically Best in Show for the World Cinema Competition. It's about a young boy named Suho who's orphaned after his cartel-affiliated father, Josue, is murdered, and we follow Suho's journey, which leads him both far from his father's path and perilously close to following in his footsteps. I didn't watch a lot in the World Cinema Competition this year. I think I only watched one other movie, but I liked that movie better than I liked this one. And, you know, sometimes there are films that transcend the festival where, you know, they pick up buzz at a festival and then they come out and you go like, wow, that was such a great movie. And you understand why it was so acclaimed. And then there are movies like Suho that I think will be remembered for being a Grand Jury Prize winner for World Cinema at Sundance, but I don't really see it making much of an impact outside of Sundance. I think it just falls into convention. It's the sort of story that has been told before. I think that at times it drags a little bit. And I was honestly, after I watched it, a little surprised that this was the film that they selected to win the Grand Jury Prize. Again, not a bad movie, but not necessarily one that I would be anxious to revisit. At number 12 is a documentary called Skywalkers, a love story about two of the world's most famous roof-toppers, Angela and Vanya, who illegally climb tall buildings and construction cranes for the sake of art and also social media followers and corporate sponsorships. And what starts as a strategic corporate sponsorship between two roof-toppers turns into a love story and then turns into almost a heist film as they decide to climb the Merdeka 118 skyscraper in Malaysia, which is reportedly one of the last super tall skyscrapers that'll be built in who knows how long. The photography in this movie is breathtaking. It rivals that of documentaries like Free Solo, but I didn't find the story as engaging because despite all of the flowery language about the art and the beauties of roof-topping, what I see in the movie are largely two people who seem motivated by social media followers and money. They're basically doing it for the clout. I'm not saying they're only doing it for the clout, but they are definitely doing it for clout. It's a gorgeous film, a beautiful film, but did not have the stakes that I felt in a movie like Free Solo, which is a similar sort of extreme sports type of documentary. Luckily, it's not going to be hard to find this one when it is released because it was acquired by Netflix at Sundance, and so when it is released, it should be streaming to a Netflix account near you. At number 11 is Porcelain War, the Grand Jury Prize winner in the U.S. documentary section. It's a movie about artists living in Ukraine who craft beautiful porcelain animals set against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. One of the co-directors of the film is from Ukraine and one of the artists, and he also trains Ukrainian civilians to fight the Russians. And there are really three angles in this documentary. There is the fight against Russia in Ukraine, there's the training of a civilian military, and then there's the juxtaposition of the horror of war and these beautiful, ornate porcelain animals. And they're all interesting avenues on their own. Does it all come together as one cohesive documentary? I'm not quite sure, but there's a lot that's interesting there. And the art that's on display in this film, the porcelain animals that they make are so beautiful, and your heart hurts to know that there are people who are capable of creating such beauty that are in such pain in Ukraine and other places around the world. And they also do some innovative stuff with the way that the porcelain is painted, where they animate the paint on the porcelain to tell parts of the story of the movie. Like I said, I think if they had committed more to one particular angle, then this would have been a stronger story overall. But because they don't, this is an interesting documentary. But again, I think that the impact is lessened a bit by the multiple different angles that are being approached. At number 10 is In the Summers, which won the directing prize and also the Grand Jury Prize in the dramatic competition, the equivalent of Best Picture at the Sundance Film Festival. It's about two sisters, Violetta and Ava, who visit their father in 4 different summers, which we see separated by a number of years each time. We meet the girls when they're young, and they mostly worship their father, Vicente, who's played by Latin music superstar Residente in a really impressive debut film performance. And the thing that I liked a lot about the storytelling is it's slow to reveal Vicente's true nature because the story treats us, the audience, almost like we're the kids. When the kids are really young, they don't notice these darker things about their father. There's a moment here or a moment there where we as an audience are going like, okay, wait a minute, I'm not so sure about that. And then as the girls get older, we see more and more of Vicente's dark side and his true nature, or at least who he is at that moment in time. And I liked that. I thought that that was an interesting angle. And the slice of life approach that this movie takes is a risky one. I did find that I was more engaged in the first half of the movie than the second half of the movie. And looking at a lot of the other films that were in the U.S. dramatic competition against In the Summers, I was somewhat surprised that this was the Grand Jury Prize winner. Again, not that this is a bad film, but for me, there were 3 or 4 other standouts. At number 9 is a documentary called Black Box Diaries, which was directed by Japanese journalist Shiori Ito, documenting her own legal struggles after accusing a man close to Japan's then Prime Minister of sexual assault. This was a really interesting documentary that takes on the anti-victim bias that can be present in culture, and specifically Japanese culture, the biases in the media, in politics, in the police, and also a Japan in which this case was gaining prominence at the same time as the Me Too movement was gaining prominence around the globe, and how that weighed into events that were already unfolding. And I also love the fact that Shiori Ito, in directing her own story, was okay with it not always being necessarily a positive portrayal of her. We see her at some of her lowest moments, and she mentioned in the Q&A after the film that she had a lot of collaborators who encouraged her to include those moments, and I think that that was a smart thing to do because it does make the story feel more well-rounded, and it's also a movie where we're looking at a moment of huge social change in the moment as it happens. It's not retrospective. It is almost in real time. And this was a case that took many years to unfold, and we cover it from beginning to end. It's a procedural at times. Sometimes it's a suspense film. There's real questions about whether her life is in danger. And it also goes into the Japanese legal system and the different evidentiary requirements. I really found this to be an interesting film. Not one of the best ones of the festival, but still one that I would recommend seeking out. At number 8 is a film called Kneecap, which won the Next Audience Award, sort of the alternative side of the Sundance Film Festival. It is a quasi-true biopic about a real-life hip-hop band in Northern Ireland that takes on the legacy of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, the real-life movement to preserve the Irish language. It's also drug-fueled and irreverent and over-the-top and packed with debauchery. It's like if Flight of the Conchords was on the front lines of a social movement, and that blurring between reality and fiction, the band members play themselves, I think actually rather well in the movie, is something that gives it that unique feel. I legitimately gained some insights into Northern Ireland and their past and the difficulties, especially 5 to 10 years ago, and I'm sure persisting now, of one generation passing on to the next generation, the legacy of activism around religion and around politics and around the country's history. There's so much to dig into there, but it's also funny. It had a lot of laughs. It is very, like I said, irreverent. It's not a serious look at these things, but also it sort of is. And, you know, it carries that message. And it's a line that's said in the movie, which is that every word of Irish spoken is like a bullet for Irish freedom. It's about the preservation of culture and the fight to preserve that culture inside this kind of zany, drug-fueled madcap comedy. It was a really interesting tone and insightful and funny in ways that I haven't seen in a lot of different movies. And it was also one of the films that was acquired out of the Sundance Film Festival. Sony Pictures Classics acquired Kneecap, so you can probably look for that film later on this year. My number 7 film is kind of a cheat. It played at Sundance. It was not in competition. It was a special screening, but I didn't technically see it through the Sundance Film Festival coverage. It was just released on Netflix. It came out at Sundance just a few days before its actual release. It's a new documentary that you can watch right now, and it's called The Greatest Night in Pop, which follows the recording session of 1985's We Are the World, which, if you're not an old man like me, is a song that featured almost every big name in American music at the time. And what I liked about this movie is it's not sort of grandiose and self-important about all of the great things that were being done, although it's mentioned exactly why that song was made and the benefits of it. It's more of a almost blow-by-blow, minute-by-minute recounting of the actual recording session, which was overnight in Los Angeles on the night of the American Music Awards. They didn't exactly even know who was going to show up, and it just goes into the difficulties of getting a group of artists to all get on the same page and talking about, well, okay, if this person doesn't like how this is done, but if we stop to talk about it, then we'll never get it recorded because we only have 8 or 10 hours to do the song. And then it goes into the specific artists and how they chose which artist did what solo. And because there were cameras there recording them the whole time, you see some of these huge names in music, including Michael Jackson, Bruce Springsteen, Huey Lewis, the Cyndi Lauper, some of the biggest names in the 1980s and beyond, in real time, coming up with these vocal performances that would go into We Are the World. And there's actually a great clip of Bob Dylan as they try to work his performance out of him. And you see him gain confidence. And somebody that had been around even as long as Bob Dylan was nervous at the scope of this thing. That's what I liked about it. It's not so much just like, oh, we made this song, rah, rah. It's a very interesting look at the actual recording session. And like I said, it was not in competition, but it is currently streaming now on Netflix if you want to check that out. At number 6 is a movie that screened out of competition as a premiere, and it's called Thelma. June Squibb plays a grandmother in her 90s who scammed out of $10,000 when men call her pretending to be her beloved grandson, Danny. And with Danny and her own children treating her like a fragile child, Thelma decides to take matters into her own hands and find her money herself. Richard Roundtree is great in the movie as Thelma's accomplice in one of his final film roles. And Fred Heckinger's Danny gives off what I can only describe as Joaquin Phoenix energy. And this movie was what you don't see a lot of at film festivals, and especially the online selection for Sundance, which was a lot of fun. It's funny and brisk and light. It still has poignant moments, but I like the idea of this 90-plus-year-old grandmother who's using her Bluetooth hearing aids as like tricks of spycraft and doing Mission Impossible type stuff. They actually reference Mission Impossible specifically as an influence for Thelma to go out and get her money back. It lacks the perceived quote-unquote seriousness of other festival films and would probably be dismissed by a lot of people, but I also think that it meaningfully addresses the tragedy and the sadness that comes with getting older and the idea that you do get lost in the shuffle and people don't see you, or your family is too overprotective and they don't treat you like a real person, or your family goes away and you're ignored. You meet all of these different people who have these different stories, and I think that it's very touching in that way, and it's just as emotionally involving as some of the more gravitas-filled movies that I watched over the last week. I had a really good time with this movie. It's a fun watch. It's a quick watch. It was, as I'm recording this, or at least as I could find, still seeking distribution, although the rumor was that there were several different people that were looking to lock the film down. If Thelma does get purchased and is released theatrically or on streaming, it's a movie that I'm definitely going to recommend. We've got lots more to break down from Sundance, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsor for this video, Rocket Money. With so many streaming services out there today, it's not unusual for people to decide that they just don't want to subscribe to everything every single month. But have you ever tried to keep track of all those different streaming services? Which one you're signed up for? Which ones you're not signed up for? Which ones have you forgotten about? Well, you can solve that problem today with Rocket Money, which doesn't just keep track of your subscriptions, but will also cancel them for you and alert you to an increase in subscription price. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills. I thought I knew exactly what I subscribed to every single month, but I was shocked for the first few weeks that I used Rocket Money, and I canceled subscriptions that added up to over $50 a month, stuff that I'd been charged for, sometimes for years, that I had just lost track of. I can see everything I subscribe to in one place, and if I don't want it, I can cancel it with just one tap. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has helped save its members an average of $720 a year with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. So stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions today by going to rocketmoney.com/Dan. That's rocketmoney.com/Dan, rocketmoney.com/Dan. So now we move into sort of the top tier, my top 5, if you will, but this is sort of its own tier of movies that go from, at the bottom with, okay, I admired certain aspects of it. The ones in the middle were ones that I definitely enjoyed, but these 5 I thought were by far the best ones that I saw at the festival, my favorite ones. And the first movie is a documentary called Daughters, which won the Audience Award in the U.S. documentary category. It also won the Festival Favorite Award. It is a multi-year documentary following the daughters and fathers in the inaugural Date with Dad program in Washington, D.C., which allows incarcerated fathers to have a father-daughter dance in jail with their daughters, many of whom either haven't seen them in years or have never even met them in person. And it's not just about the dance itself. We meet the daughters outside of the jail and we learn their stories and who they are. We meet their mothers who are often struggling to raise a child with a father who's incarcerated. We meet the fathers in counseling that happens, a mandatory counseling for weeks leading up to the dance, and we understand who they are and the struggles that they faced. It's very much not sort of a one-day documentary. This is a very wide-spanning documentary, and we get to know these daughters and these fathers, and we're rooting for a lot of them. And really, for me, what it was a story about rehabilitation or attempted rehabilitation for prisoners, not through dehumanizing them or stripping away all of their rights, but by reminding them what they're missing, the impact of their absence outside of those prison walls. And I think that it's an interesting strategy, and the program itself quotes a very high success rate for the participants not going back to jail. So in addition to these individual stories being very interesting, I think it has an overall societal story to tell. It has Kerry Washington and Joel Edgerton on board, executive producing the film. And as I was recording this, it was reported that Netflix is finalizing a deal for Daughters. So it's very likely that you'll be able to see this documentary on Netflix later this year. At number 4 is a movie called Handling the Undead, which is the debut film of Thea Fiestendahl, who co-wrote the screenplay with John Lindqvist, author of the novel that this movie was based on, as well as the novel Let the Right One In. And this movie does for zombie movies what Let the Right One In did for vampires, which is to take a traditional horror story and make it very human with a distinctly Nordic Scandinavian twist. Handling the Undead covers the early days of what might someday become what we would call the zombie apocalypse, but it's a very small movie. It's about a handful of people and how they react to their loved ones sometimes just walking back inside the house. People that are literally dead and buried and are now back. And this is the type of horror movie that has a vibe that you're either going to dig or you're not going to dig. And I liked it. I liked it a lot, actually, because it takes these familiar horror things, these things that we associate with zombie films, and kind of puts them in the background. When it does choose to use those things, they're very effective, but it is just a very slow story about grieving and loss and trauma. And again, what would you do if this happens to you? What would your actions be like? What would the doctors at the hospital say if your dead wife suddenly woke up? So many interesting angles to approach here, and I liked how this movie did it. If you're going in expecting your conventional zombie movie, you're not going to get that. It is very much closer to Let the Right One In. I would say it even has less horror in it than Let the Right One In does, but it's a movie that I really, really enjoyed. One warning I will say for the animal lovers out there, in a movie like this, if a cute animal shows up, you know that bad things are likely to happen, and yes, that does happen. So if it's something you're sensitive to, keep that in mind with Handling the Undead. It's a moment that's actually briefly in the trailers, but it's very extended in the movie itself. At number 3 is a film called Dee Dee, which won the Audience Award in the U.S. Dramatic Competition. It is the feature debut of Sean Wang, who also has an Academy Award-nominated short this year called Nai Nai and Waipo, and it's pulled largely from Wang's own adolescence. It's a coming-of-age story set in 2008, the early days of Facebook and YouTube. And yes, we are officially old enough for filmmakers who grew up with Facebook, YouTube, and MySpace to make their own movies nostalgic about their childhood. Yeah, that's happening. Dee Dee captures that time in the life of a lot of young kids, 12, 13, 14 years old, where they project both their most invulnerable aura and yet are at their most vulnerable and formative. And the main character, whose name is Chris, his family calls him Dee Dee, his friends call him Wang Wang, enters the movie very confident about his life. He has his friends. He knows who his friends are. He's getting ready to go into high school. And the movie is very much about the identity change that happens when you're that age. As interests change and you start getting interested in girls and you're interested in that girl, or that one's interested in you, or that one's not interested in you, or you shun a friend because you want to go run with this group. There's a deep well of pain there. And it's a pain that I think most people that have gone through that age have experienced. It certainly connected a lot with me on that level. Isaac Wang gives an authentic and open lead performance as Chris, and really none of the young actors hit a false note. I mean, they're annoying, but that's sort of that age. And this really seems like the world's most uncomfortable all-access documentary. It has funny moments that are both genuine and genuinely cringeworthy. And what I liked about it is that this is obviously a heavily autobiographical film, but you have a director here that is able to look back on his own adolescence without commenting on it. It's almost like he's recreating it, but it doesn't feel self-indulgent. It just feels like a little slice of life from a time that, kids that are now the age of the main characters in this film don't remember. It's a trickier balancing act than it might seem, and Dee Dee's the kind of movie that I like finding at a film festival because it would have, I think, struggled to find or to attract attention without that film festival platform. And I think it's a big reason why film festivals exist. It is a very human story. It's relatable. I think it would be relatable to people that are the age of the kids in the movie. It was relatable to me sitting at 41 years old, and I think it'd be relatable to somebody sitting at 61 years old, because there are certain things about growing up that are largely universal, social constructs and all of that sort of thing. It's a perfect companion piece to a movie like Dazed and Confused or Eighth Grade, which captured its own moment of time. And I think that there are a lot of young filmmakers that might see this film and say, oh, you can do that in the way that, sort of my generation watched Dazed and Confused and said, oh, so you can portray a moment in time, sort of a period piece, but also make it universal. That's the kind of movie this is, and I really enjoyed it. At number 2 in my runner-up spot is a documentary called Ibelin, which won the Audience Award in the World Documentary category and the Directing Award in the World Documentary category. I would have given it the top prize in the World Documentary category. It's one of my favorite documentaries in a very long time. It tells the story of Mats Sten, who passed away tragically young from a rare muscular disease called Duchenne. In the wake of his death, Mats' parents begin to receive dozens of emails from friends they didn't even know that Mats had, and they uncover a decade-long other life that Mats was living inside the game World of Warcraft as his character, Ibelin Redmore. And what follows is a full accounting of Mats' time in World of Warcraft, not just through interviews with the people that he played with and with his parents and family members. The family was given access after Mats' death to tens of thousands of pages of game logs that show his conversations and his interactions with different players. And it was basically a script to this life in World of Warcraft. And the directors of the film went to animators largely working on YouTube that were already doing this type of stuff and had them animate Mats' life in the style of World of Warcraft. So it's both a documentary of Mats' real life and a documentary of his life as Ibelin and the impact that he had around the world on the people that he played with. It's not just about a remembrance of Mats, it's about the comfort that his life gave to his parents. They say openly that the one thing they grieved while he was alive was that they didn't feel like he had any social connection, that he would live a life where he didn't really have any impact outside of the small group of people that already knew him. And yet here they see the huge impact that his son had over the years inside of a game that they didn't really even know that he was playing. This is one of the most unique and uniquely rendered documentaries that I've seen in a very long time, and it is incredibly touching. Grab the Kleenex, because this movie is a real tearjerker, both in a sad way and in that happy sad sort of way. It challenges society's assumptions about gaming and socialization, and it's also a testament to the idea of being able to be impacted outside of your own physical body or your own geography. And I hope that this isn't a movie that's written off as frivolous by some people because it's about gamers or about gaming, because that's a mistake that's made by many of the people in the movie to not just Mats, but also the people that he played with and who he advocated for in real life. This is such a tender and sad, but also loving, true story. And it's another movie that you won't have to look too hard to find because it was purchased by Netflix and will assumedly be streaming on Netflix later this year. I think that it is worthy not just of consideration among some of the best documentaries of the year, and I know it's early, but I'm going to put it on my list among consideration of the early favorites to be one of the best movies of 2024. And that leaves us with one last film, and it's really interesting which movie it turns out to be, because I think a couple of years ago, Jesse Eisenberg had his directorial debut at Sundance with a movie called When You Finish Saving the World. That was not only my least favorite film of Sundance that year, it was one of my least favorite films of the year. It actually was released in 2023. It was on my worst of list for 2023. I detested that movie. And yet with his second film, which is called A Real Pain, Jesse Eisenberg, who wrote and directed this film, made my favorite movie of Sundance 2024. A Real Pain is about two Jewish cousins on a heritage tour in Poland following the death of their beloved grandmother. David is a reserved Jesse Eisenberg type, and Benji is a brash and personable Kieran Culkin type. They're played by Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin. At least that's who we see at first. But over the course of the trip, both of these characters unravel metaphorically and emotionally, and we see the well of grief and pain and at times resentment that's hiding underneath those facades. It almost plays with your your perception of who these two are as actors, to make you think that you know who they are, and then really spins these characters off in very interesting directions. A Real Pain is at times cathartic. It is often hilarious. Sometimes it is deeply uncomfortable, but not like in that off-putting way, just in that way that kind of makes you want to watch through your fingers. But it really is led by two fantastic performances, along with an ensemble cast that's really strong. Really great direction and great writing from Jesse Eisenberg. As much as I vilified him for his last movie, I have to tip my hat to him on this one. This is a great second film from him. And this is the kind of film that I think could transcend Sundance, which is probably why Searchlight acquired it for around $10 million, one of the bigger deals of the festival. Emma Stone is also on board as a co-producer. She was reportedly very involved creatively with the film. And if this doesn't make an impact on the Oscars race, there's so much of 2024 that we don't know about yet. I do think that A Real Pain is going to make a big impact on the indie scene and in the indie awards race. So those are my favorite movies that I saw, but there were so many movies that I didn't see, either because I wasn't able to watch them due to time constraints, or there were a lot of movies that just weren't available to watch at home that only played at the Sundance Film Festival. A quick rundown of some of those films, some notable films. My Old Ass from writer-director Megan Park, who also made the film The Fallout, is about a young girl warned by a future version of herself not to fall in love. It sold for $15 million to Amazon MGM and will reportedly get a theatrical release. It's What's Inside, I think, had the biggest deal of the festival. It was acquired by Netflix for $17 million. Reviewing press was apparently asked not to reveal details about the plot, but it's described as a sci-fi horror film about a group of college friends reuniting. A24's A Different Man stars Sebastian Stan as a man who has facial reconstruction surgery, then decides to play himself in a play based on his own real life. A24 will release the film later this year. Will and Harper was reportedly a huge festival favorite. It's a documentary about Will Ferrell and his friend of over a decade, Harper Steele, who revealed around the time COVID hit that she was transitioning late in life. Again, reportedly a rapturous reception, so I think this one is going to get acquired probably very soon. Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, is a documentary about Christopher Reeve that was also well received. WB is reportedly close to finalizing a deal around $15 million, which is a huge price tag for a documentary. Freaky Tales is a movie from Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck about four intersecting stories in 1980s California, which stars, among others, Pedro Pascal. Lionsgate currently has distribution rights, but is reportedly also open to other offers. The reception was mixed on Freaky Tales. Ghostlight is a story about a family forced to face real trauma while acting in a stage production of Romeo and Juliet. It was written and co-directed by my high school classmate, almost, she was a year below me, Kelly O'Sullivan. It was acquired by IFC Films for distribution in North America, and I am happy to support somebody, not only from my own hometown, but from my own high school. Girls Will Be Girls won the Audience Award in the World Cinema Dramatic Competition. It's about a young Indian girl's first romance as she faces interference from her mother. Hitman was co-written and co-directed by Glenn Powell and Richard Linklater. It's about a man pretending to be a professional hitman and was picked up by Netflix, releasing this summer. I Saw the TV Glow stars Justice Smith as one of two young people whose obsession with the TV show begins to affect their reality. A24 is distributing this film already. Love Lies Bleeding, which was on my 2024 preview show, had its debut at Sundance, starring Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien in a story of revenge and bodybuilding. It already has a release date of March 8th from A24. Presence is the new film from Steven Soderbergh about a haunted house story from the perspective of a ghost. It was picked up for distribution by Neon. Sasquatch Sunset also stars Jesse Eisenberg and Riley Keough as a family of Sasquatches in the latest film from the directors of Kumiko the Treasure Hunter. Reportedly, they are in full Sasquatch makeup the entire time. Sasquatch Sunset was picked up by Bleecker Street, which means it'll probably play in 400 theaters for 2 weekends and never be heard again. Suncoast debuted to mixed to positive reviews. It's the debut film from director Laura Chen, and it hits Hulu on February 9th. The Outrun stars Saoirse Ronan as a woman returning home after a stint in rehab. As of now, as far as I can tell, it is seeking North American distribution, and there has been some buzz around Saoirse Ronan's performance in this film. Winner stars Amelia Jones as reality winner who leaked a report about Russian interference in the U.S. elections. This is from Susanna Fogel, who, among other things, co-wrote the film Booksmart. It is currently seeking distribution. And then A New Kind of Wilderness was the Grand Jury Prize winner in the World Documentary Competition about a family that has to adjust to major life changes and reintegrate into city life after time spent in isolation. And that's my wrap up of Sundance 2024. Did you watch any of the movies, either at Sundance or at home? What were some of your favorites, or what are some of these that you're looking forward to seeing? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching me here on the channel. Be sure to stay tuned for more movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.